Being available is not a flaw. Caring, listening, and showing up for others are powerful human qualities. The problem begins when availability exists without boundaries. When you are always accessible, always responsive, and always accommodating, regardless of how you're treated, you unintentionally invite manipulation. Toxic people don't see constant availability as kindness. They see it as permission. Boundaries are the rules that protect your time, energy, and emotional space. Without them, your availability becomes a resource others feel entitled to use. Toxic individuals are especially skilled at detecting this. They notice who answers immediately, who rearranges their life to please others, who feels guilty for saying no. Once they identify that pattern, they begin to push further. Manipulation rarely starts aggressively. It starts subtly. A small disrespect here, a guilt trip there, a request that crosses a line, followed by emotional pressure if you hesitate. When there are no clear boundaries, these behaviors escalate naturally. Not because the toxic person is confused, but because nothing stops them. Availability without boundaries creates an imbalance of power. One person takes, the other absorbs. Over time, the available person becomes exhausted, resentful, and emotionally drained, while the toxic person grows more demanding. This dynamic continues because there is no resistance, only adaptation. You adjust, you tolerate, you excuse. Toxic people depend on this imbalance. They rely on your fear of conflict, your desire to be liked, and your hope that things will improve. They know that if you keep showing up without limits, they don't have to change. Your availability becomes their safety net, allowing them to behave poorly without consequences. Boundaries disrupt manipulation because they introduce uncertainty. When you no longer respond immediately, when you say no without explaining, when you stop accommodating disrespect, the toxic person loses their leverage. They can no longer predict your reactions or control your energy. Manipulation fails when access is no longer guaranteed. Availability should be a choice, not an obligation. When you attach boundaries to your presence, you shift from being usable to being respected. Over-explaining often comes from a good place. It comes from wanting to be understood, wanting to avoid conflict, and wanting to be fair. But with toxic people, over-explaining does the opposite of what you intend. Instead of creating clarity, it teaches them how to disrespect you while keeping access to your energy. When you over-explain, you turn a simple boundary into a debate. A clear no becomes a long justification. A personal limit becomes an invitation for negotiation. Toxic people don't listen to your reasons. They study them. Every explanation you give becomes information they can later use to guilt trip you, manipulate you, or push back against your boundary. Over-explaining sends an unspoken message: my decision needs your approval. It suggests uncertainty even when you feel confident inside. Toxic people sense this immediately. They don't respect boundaries that come with apologies, long stories, or emotional defenses. They see it as an opening to challenge your decision rather than accept it. This pattern often forms when you've been conditioned to please others. You explain because you don't want to be seen as rude. You explain because you fear being misunderstood. You explain because you've learned that saying no alone feels unsafe. Toxic people exploit this conditioning. They keep asking questions, poking holes, and pushing until you either give in or feel emotionally drained. The more you explain, the more power you hand over. You allow others to judge whether your boundary is reasonable enough. You give them space to argue, invalidate, or dismiss your needs. Respect doesn't come from being understood. It comes from being clear and firm. Healthy people don't require detailed explanations to respect your limits. Toxic people demand them because they are searching for control. When you stop over-explaining, you remove remove their ability to twist your words. You make your boundaries simple, solid, and non-negotiable. Silence, clarity, and repetition are stronger than justification. A boundary stated once and upheld through action teaches respect far more effectively than 1,000 explanations ever could. As long as your peace is optional, toxic people will keep bargaining with it. They will push, provoke, and pressure until you give it up to avoid conflict, guilt, or discomfort. Peace only becomes real protection when it is non-negotiable, when you decide that no relationship, no approval, and no explanation is worth sacrificing your inner stability. Many people say they want peace, but their actions suggest otherwise. They tolerate disrespect to keep connections. They stay silent to avoid tension. They compromise their emotional safety to be seen as understanding or kind. Toxic people recognize this gap instantly. They know your peace is flexible, so they test how much of it they can take. Making peace non-negotiable means you stop trading your well-being for temporary comfort. It means discomfort in the moment becomes preferable to long-term emotional chaos. Toxic people rely on your fear of confrontation. When that fear is gone, their influence weakens. They lose the power to destabilize you because you no longer engage on their terms. This shift is internal before it is external. You stop asking, how do I keep this person calm, and start asking, how do I keep myself stable? You stop managing other people's emotions and start managing your own boundaries. Peace becomes a standard, not a reward for enduring bad behavior. When peace is non-negotiable, decisions become clearer. You leave conversations that drain you. You shorten interactions that cross lines. You stop explaining why something hurts and simply remove yourself from it. Toxic people find this unsettling because they can no longer pull you into emotional turbulence. Non-negotiable peace does not make you selfish. It makes you grounded. It shifts your life from reaction to intention. Once your peace is protected at all costs, toxic dynamics begin to collapse on their own. Setting boundaries is easy. Enforcing them is what changes everything. A boundary that is spoken but not upheld becomes meaningless, and toxic people learn this quickly. They don't take boundaries seriously until they see consequences, not explanations. Consistency is what turns words into reality. Inconsistent boundaries confuse healthy people, but they empower toxic ones. When you say, this is not okay, yet continue to tolerate the behavior, you send a mixed signal. Toxic individuals interpret this as permission to continue. They assume your limits are emotional reactions, not firm decisions. Consistency is uncomfortable at first because it requires emotional discipline. It means resisting the urge to explain yourself again. It means not giving in when guilt shows up. It means standing firm even when the other person gets upset, silent, or dramatic. Toxic people often escalate when they realize their usual tactics aren't working. This escalation is not a sign you're wrong. It's proof the boundary is being felt. A boundary enforced once but ignored the next time teaches people to wait you out. Toxic people are patient when they know you'll eventually fold. They test your limits repeatedly to see if you mean what you say. The moment you stay consistent, calm, firm, and unresponsive to manipulation, the testing slows down. Consistency builds respect because it creates predictability. Others learn that your words and actions align. There is no loophole, no emotional leverage, no second guessing. Toxic people lose interest in situations where the rules don't change and the payoff disappears. Boundaries are not about controlling others. They are about controlling your response. When you enforce them consistently, you protect your energy, your time, and yourself. Respect. Toxic people rarely cross boundaries all at once. They test them gradually, carefully, and repeatedly. Just like a burglar checking doors and windows to see which one opens easily, toxic individuals probe your limits to see where resistance is weakest. They are not looking for fairness. They are looking for access. The first test is usually small. A disrespectful comment disguised as a joke, a favor asked at an inconvenient time, a subtle guilt trip. These moments seem minor, which is why many people ignore them. But toxic people are watching closely. They are observing whether you speak up, stay silent, laugh it off, or over-explain. Your response determines their next move. When a small violation goes unchallenged, it signals vulnerability, not emotional weakness, but boundary weakness. Toxic people take this as confirmation that they can push further. Each test becomes slightly bigger, slightly bolder, until the behavior you once would have rejected feels normal. This pattern is dangerous because it happens slowly. You don't notice the line moving until it's far behind you. Toxic people rely on your adaptability, your empathy, and your tendency to minimize discomfort. They trust that you will adjust rather than confront. Strong locks don't require confrontation, they require firmness. When a limit is met with immediate, calm resistance, toxic people lose interest quickly. They don't enjoy resistance, they enjoy control. A consistent response tells them this door will not open, no matter how many times they knock. Understanding this removes self-blame. You didn't let someone become toxic overnight. They tested, you tolerated, and the behavior escalated. The moment you stop tolerating the tests, the pattern breaks. Toxic behavior survives on reaction the same way fire survives on oxygen, without emotional response. Anger, frustration, fear, guilt, or even excessive explanation. There is nothing for toxicity to feed on. Toxic people are not driven by logic or resolution. They are driven by impact. They want to see that they can affect you. Every time you react emotionally, you confirm their influence. Raised voices, defensive explanations, visible frustration, or emotional breakdowns all communicate the same messages. You have power over my emotional state. Toxic people store this information and reuse it. They learn which buttons work and press them repeatedly. This is why arguing with toxic people rarely leads to clarity. They are not engaging to understand. They are engaging to provoke. The argument itself becomes the reward. Even negative attention keeps the connection alive. Silence and calm, on the other hand, remove the payoff. Reactions also create cycles. You react, they escalate, defend. You defend, they twist your words. You explain, they invalidate. Over time, you become emotionally exhausted while they remain energized. Toxic people often feel strongest when others feel drained. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions. It means choosing where and with whom your emotions are expressed. Healthy people respond to communication. Toxic people exploit reaction. When you stop reacting in real time and start responding through action, distance but reduced access, the dynamic shifts. A calm, neutral presence is deeply unsettling to toxic individuals. They push harder at first, trying to extract the reaction they're used to. When it doesn't come, frustration replaces control. Without reaction, the behavior loses its purpose. Mastering your reactions is not about being passive. It's about being strategic with your energy. Silence and distance are often misunderstood as weakness or avoidance, but in reality, they are forms of strength and self-control. When used intentionally, they communicate boundaries more clearly than words ever could. Toxic people expect engagement, arguments, explanations, emotional reactions. When you offer none of these, you disrupt their entire strategy. Silence removes the stage. Toxic individuals thrive when there is an audience for their behavior. They want you to react, to defend yourself, to justify your feelings, or to participate in the chaos. Silence denies them that platform. It signals that their behavior is not worthy your energy or attention. Distance reinforces the message that access to you is conditional. It is not punishment, it is protection. By stepping back, replying less, limiting interactions, or physically removing yourself, you make it clear that disrespect results in reduced access. Toxic people often struggle with this because they rely on constant proximity to maintain influence. Words can be twisted, but silence cannot be manipulated. When you stop explaining and start withdrawing, toxic people are forced to face the consequences of their behavior without distraction. This often leads to discomfort, frustration, or attempts to pull you back in. Those attempts are proof that the boundary is working. Distance also gives you clarity. Away from constant emotional noise, you begin to see patterns more clearly. You recognize how much energy was being drained and how peaceful things feel without ongoing conflict. This awareness strengthens your resolve to maintain the boundary. Silence and distance are not permanent for everyone, but they are powerful reset tools. They shift control back to you and remove toxic people's ability to dominate your emotional space. Self-respect does not require permission. Yet many people feel an intense need to explain their boundaries, decisions, and emotional limits in order to feel justified. Toxic people take advantage of this instinct. They demand explanations, not because they care to understand, but because they believe access to you entitles them to answers. When you explain your self-respect, you place it on trial. You invite others to judge whether your boundary is reasonable, fair, or acceptable. Toxic people use this opportunity to minimize your feelings, invalidate your experiences, or shift the focus back onto themselves. What should be a personal decision turns into a debate. Healthy people accept boundaries even when they don't fully understand them. Toxic people insist on explanations because they are looking for loopholes. They believe that if they can dismantle your reasoning, they can dismantle your boundary. This is why no amount of explanation ever seems enough. Self-respect is internal. It is a standard you hold for yourself, not a rule others need to approve. When you stop explaining, you communicate confidence and finality. Your actions say, this is who I am and what I allow, without inviting discussion. Letting go of the need to explain is uncomfortable at first. Silence can feel rude. Firmness can feel selfish. Toxic people rely on these feelings to keep you engaged. But as you grow more secure in your values, you realize that clarity does not require justification. And when self-respect becomes your foundation, explanations become unnecessary. Boundaries exist because you decided they do, and that is enough. Consistency is the invisible armor that protects you from manipulation. Toxic people rely on unpredictability, indecision, and exceptions to weaken your resolve. When your actions are consistent, your words and behaviors align, leaving no room for them to exploit loopholes. They can no longer push, guilt, or confuse you because your standards remain firm regardless of circumstances. Manipulation thrives in chaos. If one day you enforce a boundary and the next day you ignore it, toxic people learn to wait you out. They test repeatedly until you revert to old patterns of compliance. Each exception erodes the authority of your boundaries and signals that control is negotiable. Consistency stops this cycle before it starts. Consistency also builds credibility, both to yourself and others. It reinforces your identity as someone who is predictable in their values and unwavering in their principles. When toxic individuals realize that you cannot be swayed or bent to their whims, they lose interest in engaging. The thrill of control disappears, leaving them powerless. Emotional manipulation often works because reactions are inconsistent. When you react differently to similar situations, toxic people sense weakness and explode it. By responding with the same calm, firm, and measured approach every time, you remove the possibility of emotional exploitation. Consistency is not rigidity. It is intentional repetition of self-respected choices. Over time, this becomes a habit that naturally filters out people who drain your energy. Toxic behavior collapses because it cannot survive in a system that rewards firmness and punishes inconsistency.